Hello, everyone. Welcome to Creativity-Hive's weekly program. This is episode 113. Yay, us. My name is Miriam Haugen. I am part of the Creativity-Hive team. We help creatives learn to make impactful storytelling videos through one-on-one teaching and live group coaching. And our weekly hangout brings you people working in all forms of motion media, from broadcasting, video, and all of the related industries from across the globe. So be sure and leave a comment and tell us where you're joining it from. Today, we have a very special guest, the famous, the infamous R. Neil Haugen. So I'm going to bring him on the screen in a moment here. There he is. Well, wait a minute.
Hello.
There he is.
Infamous is perhaps a good solid word, considering some recent things I've had with certain people at a certain large corporation we know of, but
That shall remain nameless?
that shall remain nameless. All.
Yes. And we've had some fun with, I think we mentioned in our last episode that we had recently moved our business. And so things are not set up exactly as they should be. And Neil was frustrated because his camera was not, wanted to give him good lighting and just kind of a mess. But here we are. So we are going to talk about Premiere Pro, and since Adobe Max is coming up in just, about 2 weeks, I think, 3 weeks maybe, till
Yep.
Adobe Max 2023. And they always come out with new things at Max. So yeah, what can we expect, Neil?
Well, one of the things that's kind of handy anymore is, and I'm trying to get there we go, Premiere Pro over on my other screen so I can bring it up here. They have their public beta process, and so if you pay attention to the public beta, you have a pretty good idea of what's going to be coming out and going on. And they've got some changes. There's some things that people still don't understand all that well about their color management, and there's some changes and that they've done to the program and whatnot. And so I'm trying to explain a couple of those for it. And while I'm talking, I'm trying to set up my
Right.
my computer. I am at in our basement, which is part of the reason why behind me you see the blurred out background, because it's an absolute mess in here, because I don't have a place to work from. Yeah, we moved out of our studio some time ago, and we've got Miriam set up in her new office, and it's mostly working, but I'm still working on the some of the electrical, installing some of the electrical over there. And I don't have any place other than this. I've got 3 of my 4 monitors hooked up. I can kind of sort of work, but I don't have, I'm used to having my cameras and a whole bunch of lights and everything. If you notice how horrible my image is on this today, that's because I have been going nuts the last 20 minutes trying to change. I've got like 4 different lights set up in here. No matter what I want to do, it wants to blow out my skin, like right up over here.
Yeah,
And
and we were very conscious and very concerned about that, but it is what it is. And
yeah,
so yes, and you'll also notice that if he moves, he blurs quite a bit, and that's because he had to turn off a bunch of lights in order to. So he's working with a really low light situation, and yeah, it's not optimal, but that's all right as long as you can tell us some interesting things, Neil.
yeah. Well, I think the first thing I'm going to talk about is just explain a little bit about how Premiere Pro handles your image color space and dynamic range, because it is a little different than what most people think of. And so, uh, you know, some of this is going to be kind of colorist talk, and I'll keep it as simple as I can. Um, course, Premiere is compared to Resolve. And Resolve started life as a flat-on grading app. That's all it did. It was a colorist app for grading. And they've added editing capabilities and graphics and whatnot to it. So it's getting, in many ways, it's getting fairly close to Premiere Pro for some of the editing and graphic stuff, but it still has that massive color set. Well, because of that, they of course have always been on the bleeding edge of giving the photographer or giving the video post person control over uh, uh, anything color, and that includes your input space, timeline working spaces, monitor, output, the whole thing. You've always had an amazing amount of control, which of course means that an awful lot of people starting out in Resolve basically get themselves in a deep world of hurt and don't even know it until people start saying, a lot of your outputs are really funky. And then they have to start finding out that, oh, you don't set this for that. Basically, what they had done was they've got 4 or 5 things that they set wrong, and in concatenation, when they look at the files in a particular app on their computer, it actually looked like they wanted it to. But you take that and you put it on anybody else's computer that was properly set up, and it looked like garbage. And Premiere used to have the attitude that everything was Rec 709, and they just built a Rec 709 system, which is sRGB for the color primaries, um, a gamma for the display of 2.4, and 100 nits brightness was figured to be, the standard thing for a reference on a grading monitor. And it was hardwired so that if you had your system physically set up for that, it was right on. And if it wasn't, then you had problems. And people complained that, well, it wasn't color managed. Well, actually, it was hardwired color managed. You were just simply expected to have a broadcast compliant Rec 709 system. So a couple years ago, or 3 years ago now, they added in some high dynamic range HDR capabilities. And that's not within the sRGB primaries and the 100 nits or 100 IRE range for 100 millivolts IRE, the old video standard. So they had to make some changes. And that has really been goofy for a lot of people. And I have to say, a lot of the ways that they've gone about doing it, I've looked at and gone, that's not how I would have approached it, but oh well, I'll make the most of it. And one of the things that they did that was really bizarre was you had, you have several things in color management in video. You have the image itself, in other words, your clip. You have, you can have a timeline color management, the sequence you're working on, because you can have that in a set that for color space. You could have your display has a color space, and of course you also export to a color space. Well, they had this all in separate places. So there wasn't any one unified thing or way to do it. You had to run all over the program to find the controls and set and check your color. So I put in a request, and yeah, I actually know the people at the top of the program. So I put in a request immediately at that time that can we have a unified, think Lord of the Rings, one ring to rule them all. Can we have a unified panel for setting color? And they finally introduced that a little after they came out with the 24 .x series of builds in their Premiere Pro public beta. The released version is at 23.6. I expect that will be the last version of the 2023 series builds. And so back in, I think it was early June, the public beta went from being 23 to build to being a 24 build. And along the way, after a month or two after that, all of a sudden there was a settings tab in the telemetry panel. And so there's one place that you can go to and handle all of your color management. But that still gets back to one thing that so many people have had a discussion on, and this is one of those things that I can start talking of this and watch Miriam's eyes glaze over.
No, I love hearing you do geek talk. This is great,
And
Will.
yeah, but
Awesome.
when I'm explaining to her what I'm thinking about when we're not on the air, and I'll be going into this. I was realizing this, and start talking about these things, and I can just see her go.
Right.
Um,
But I hear you talk about this stuff so much that I feel like I have, a very surface level understanding. And I don't need to know the ins and outs and great depth, but the more I hear that you going into great depth, I my understanding is broadening. I think that's a good way to put it. My understanding is broadening. It's not necessarily getting deeper.
well, and this is a very common thing in our relationship, because for 40 years more, we had a portrait studio, and I was the one that started it, and then Miriam came in, and anymore she has the portrait studio. I do this video stuff, and she is very, very good, and but has always relied on me to be the tech geek that explains all the stuff, figures out how to do. She'd come up with an idea for lighting. Well, that's the thing I used to always do. I'd come up. I want to be this kind of lighting, and how can I meter the light so I can make it? This is back in the days when we were working with film, and you couldn't check on the back of the camera. And uh, professional shooting film, it was $1.25. Every time you click the shutter, $1.25 to $1.50 just went poof, because you had to pay for the film. There was processing and printing of the proofs, and so there were times when I would be testing out, trying to figure out how to meter a particular type of lighting, and I didn't want to take go to the expense of shooting film and having to wait several days. I wanted to do it
Right.
now. So
You
at
wanted
that
to see
time,
the results so you could make modifications like we now do by looking at the back of the camera.
exactly, and there was a way you could mostly do that, and that was by putting a Polaroid film back on the camera. Well, that was only about $1.15 a shot, right? But it was immediate. So there were a couple days where I went through like 50, 60 shots of Polaroid when Miriam was expecting me to be doing some lab work or something else. And instead, I'm in the camera room burning Polaroid. A buck just went by, another buck just went by, another buck just went by. And she's going, "What the heck are you doing?"
Yes, we're not made of money.
But I'm learning something. And so I'd learn how to do things. And that's what I've done all the way along. And so in video, I also have been very involved in color for the entire decade plus that I've been involved in this. And one of the questions that has always been a problem for colorists and for the more experienced people in working in color, they want to know how Premiere's pipeline, as it's called, works. From the time that you bring a clip into Premiere, into the project panel, you import it or ingest it, whatever you want to call it, and then you put it on a sequence and then export it. What is the actual processing that is done to that clip? And everybody has assumed that they transformed the clip, which a transform is a mathematical or LUT-based process. You can do it either way. And but there was an assumption that they either used a LUT or a transform to turn every clip into Rec 709. And then when you did your corrections with Lumetri, that it was those were applied to the clip after that transform. That may have been the way it was done before they added their HDR capabilities, but it is clearly not the way it's being done now. And people were still thinking that something like this was going on. And in my testing, I couldn't figure out exactly what was going on, but it wasn't what any of us thought. And of course, they're very close on what they talk about normally. And so when we were down in Vegas for NAB, the National Association of Broadcasters, huge trade show, this last April. I was talking with a good friend who is also has been an upper supervisor for a couple different programs, and has done a number of other things with Adobe. And I'm not sure exactly what his position is at this moment, because they keep changing positions and they've got all these fancy names. And I listened to the
Yeah, and the names aren't always descriptive of exactly what they do.
and they don't even necessarily tell you what programs their work ends up being used in. And so it's like, oh, you're that now. And so at any rate, I said, okay, I want to know specifically. People are wondering, like, what is the thing? So like if um, you have a clip from an iPhone, for example. Most iPhones shoot an HLG, which is a hybrid log gamma. It's a form of high dynamic range HDR work. And it has a wider dynamic range. In other words, a different dynamic range is black to white. It has a much wider dynamic range. And then color spaces vary by how big an area of color, of the visible color area that you take. And it uses a much bigger color space than sRGB. And so if you're going to use it in a Rec 709 standard definition, or SDR, I should say, standard dynamic range workflow and output, which is far more reliable and, easy to do at this point than HDR work is. You have to do a thing within Premiere Pro where you go in and you tell the program to override the color space that's listed in the clip and use Rec 709 as the color space for the clip. So you would do that. You would override the color space for the clip. Then you make sure your sequence color space is set for Rec 709, and then you export for Rec 709, and it works fine. But of course, a lot of people didn't know you were supposed to do the override to change your clip color space. So they would just take an HLG clip, put it on a Rec 709 sequence. Well, you could use the lumetri controls in Premiere to back the contrast range and the saturation down so it looked like it was working fine. And then you go ahead and do your standard SDR export preset, and you got a blown out mush looking even worse than my image does right now. And so people were wondering, what in the world? And so I was trying to push this one friend down at and I have several people that I would consider good friends in the program. So even if you know the people I go around with, there's no way you could be sure you were even close to the right one. But so I pushed him on this. What is the working space, as it's called, for the timeline? And he looked at me for a moment, and he kind of looked around. There was no one standing around us other than Miriam. And he said, "We don't have one."
That's radical.
You don't have a color space, a working color space. No.
Which answers a lot about why people weren't answering your questions. You kept trying to ask them, what is your color space? And they were just, they would answer other questions, but they would never answer that one.
I had a thing. I was supposed to be writing an article for, the Frame.io has their blog thing that they do with articles. They come out twice a week with articles, and they were paying me to write an article. And the engineers were supposed to be telling me exactly what was going on to write this article to explain to people exactly what was in Premiere's color thing. And I'd ask very pointed questions, and I'd get other stuff answered. And so Frame.io finally said, "Yeah, we're past wanting to get that article, so we're canceling the article." And on we went. So that's what we were just into that period going down there. And so all of a sudden he's going, we don't have a working space.
So what did they have? What do they have?
And I thought about it for a moment, and I said, So when we set a timeline working space, is that actually more of just an EOTF for for the display monitor? And
What
that, of
does
course,
EOTF mean?
oh, this is getting into the things that I know quite a number of these compared to the average bear, but um, I will get into discussions. Oh, Robbie Carmen.
Well,
Uh,
okay, just tell us what OETF means. Come on.
Robbie will start spewing out this stuff, and I'm even going, huh? And EOTF is electro optical transfer function.
Oh, EOTF,
Hmm.
Okay, all
And
right.
it is the inverse of an OETF. Can you guess what an OETF would be?
No.
Optoelectrical transfer function. It's the inverse, right?
Okay.
Okay, so with video capture, the scene is called linear space because you double brightness and you double the brightness. It's just a thing. Cameras can't record that data in such a huge range because sensors can't handle that. And so they do a compression of the range and mathematically try and work it so that it comes out as if it's the same thing. So you have the camera sensor captures data, and then there is an OETF, an optoelectrical transfer function done in the camera to get that to it's not always in log, but a log-like encoding process that cuts the data down a lot. Okay, so that's now encoded as an electrical signal, not an optical anymore. But when you want to take that from your video file and display it on anything, it has to get turned back into a more linear signal that gives you a visual thing like what we're used to seeing. And so that's where you have the electro optical, the inverse function. You go from optical to electrical signal, and then you have the one go from electrical signal to optical to the visual for the display. So that's why when I said, so like when you set Rec 709 for a working color space, you're in essence, that's just an EOTF for the monitor. And he stood there a moment. Yeah, yeah, that's probably the easiest way. Technically, there's some other stuff going on, but that would be the easiest way to think about it. And I was going, oh. And then, of course, my brain's going, well, that's given me immediately about 150 other questions. And I'm sure in another couple hours, I'll think of a couple hundred more. But, I've done some
Yes,
testing.
you're very good at asking questions.
I'll wake up in the middle of the night with my mind having been processing things while I'm sleeping, and all of a sudden go, oh, well, if they do this, then you do this. Now you apply this kind of a function here, and so and that's the way my brain works. So, and I've done a little testing, a little checking, and I've got one last little bit to get that I can test to get the last of it. But I'm comfortable enough now between what he said and what I've tested to say that he's right. The working space that you set simply is an EOTF for the monitor. It's like in Resolve, you can have a working space for your timeline and a separate working space for the monitor. And most colorists actually work that way. And then the problem comes in, you have to remember that when you export then out the other end, you use the same EOTF on the export as you used for your monitoring. And then you end up with what you expect to see. So how does this apply to anything? Okay, you have an HLG clip. You put it on a Rec 709 sequence. You shrink it down with telemetry control so it looks okay, and you export and it's blown out. Why is it still blown out? Well, actually, if you think about it, you realize you have the clip, but they don't transfer the data of the clip to actual Rec 709 to HLG on the sequence. It's still original clip data. What you do is they put on top of that the lumetri controls that you've done. And so you can kind of, move it around some. And then they apply that EOTF, the electro-optical transfer function, to the image going to the monitor, and it looks normal. The problem comes if you use a standard dynamic range export preset. Well, there's no EOTF built into that. It just takes the clip data, the clip data is still huge compared to Rec 709, and the lumetri stuff. And if you don't have that EOTF added in there, you haven't done enough in lumetri to actually bring it down to Rec 709. And so in order to do that, if you had your sequence, say you had an HLG clip, you have an HLG sequence, and you use the lumetri controls to bring everything down so that nothing is over about 95 IRE or nits on the left side scale in the RGB, and then export, and also bring your saturation down quite a bit so that your colors are within, you might actually be able to get closer to getting an export out without having to using an SDR, a standard export thing. And that's the one last thing I haven't actually tested. I'm going to be doing that when I get some time here. I'm not, doing electrical work. But I'm
I
pretty
think what would be really useful to many, many people is just to say, this is the recommended workflow. You start out here. This is what you bring in. This is, just a step by step. That's the way my brain works and the way I'd want to see it.
Yeah.
And so we should put that out.
Yeah. And
as soon as you have confirmed that everything's working the way that you think it should work.
And now I would like to see if I can bring up my screen, because I want to show something they have done in the public build. So how do I do this, dear?
Okay, there is there should be a share screen. Let's see. I'm not seeing the share screen down at the bottom. Present. That's what it is called. It's called present.
Share screen. Okay.
And then I will see once you bring it in, then I will be able to add it to the screen. So everybody can see. That's the goal.
Okay.
Oh, add the stage. There we go.
Ta-da. Okay. Ta-da. Now, this is what people are used to seeing if you're just running a basic standard Adobe Premiere Pro color space, where you've got the working space where lumetri color over here, program monitor, and a couple scopes set up, project panel down here, and of course that all important timeline right here. Well, the new thing, and this is the most recent 24 series build, the new thing they've got in lumetri is, notice I got my lumetri tab here. You've got edit.
Yeah, we can't see your mouse.
So, you can't see the mouse. Okay.
So you'll just have to describe.
Okay. Over to the right, you see the lumetri panel.
The three little circles is
right.
Yeah.
Maybe if I come over here now, can you see my mouse?
Yeah, now I can see it. Ta-da.
Okay. And so we've got the lumetri color tab here, right? And I'm now outlined in blue. And now it used to be that there weren't these two subheadings under there. It was just lumetri color, and then it started with, right down to source and here. Now there's two tabs: edit, which is this, and settings, which is this. And virtually all color settings in Premiere Pro now can be accessed from here, even though some of them still live like in the preferences. But you can drop this down and turn on display color management or extended dynamic range monitoring. Now, most people should have display color management checked most of the time working in Premiere, unless you have a a really well set up, calibrated, and profiled system, really tight to either SDR, Rec 709, or to the HDR format you're using. And if you don't understand what I mean by calibrated and profiled, you probably don't.
You probably don't, and you probably, like most of us peons, should just, yeah, do what he says.
Use the display color management, because
Yes.
then Premiere looks at the ICC profile for your monitor and will go, okay, so you're set up for Rec 709 right now, and so we'll try and do that. And they'll do some other things to try and make sure that the image looks as close to a professional Rec 709 image as possible, given that they, of course, don't know how your monitor is really set. Now, if you are going to do HDR work, high dynamic range, and you can do that in either HLG, hybrid log gamma, or PQ, which is perceptual quantization. But if you're going to do either form of HDR that Premiere can do, you must have the display color management checked. And if you are on a Mac, the extended dynamic range monitoring checked also. If you're on a PC, I don't think that is of any use or anything. That's just, I think, pretty much a Mac thing. And transmit out device playback. I have a nice big monitor that I use for my full screen, so that the transmit out gives you where the image is the entire monitor. There's no window around it or anything. It just fills the entire monitor. And I normally work with one of my screens that is my transmit out screen. And that also means that I frequently keep the program monitor, this area right here that has the image in it. I tend to keep that pretty small, because I don't need that big to see it, because I'm watching it. You know, I've got a UHD monitor. I've got a 38, 40, 20, 160 monitor here that I'm, 32-inch monitor that I'm looking at with the image. So yeah, I don't need to have my program monitor. So I normally will have when I'm working my user interface screen, I'll have my Lumetri panel so that it's out like this, especially because when you get to the curves, that gives you these nice wide curves, and I want a lot of scopes. Well, I normally even have another scope here. I'll have the vector scope up and everything. And so, yeah, I'll have this itty bitty little program monitor here because I've got it on a UHD screen. So why do I need it, big like that? But so those are the things that, you get into multiple monitors and everything. It's really handy to have. And that's what this transmit device is. Now, production, I use production mode. I'm not going to go into that. A lot of people do standalone projects. Production allows you to work a bunch of projects at the same time. But so this is production. If for most of you, this will say project settings, because it's production white or the project settings. And so these are the color controls you have for those. And for most people, HDR graphics white, what is that? Graphics white, think of a white piece of printer paper, typing paper, we used to call it, in sunlight where it might still be showing a bit of texture to it. Okay, that's the brightness that the graphics white is. And it's not something that it's kind of puzzlement, because it's not something that you actually see in the program when it's set up, but it's something that the program puts in the metadata that can be important to devices displaying your HDR. You can set that for 200 or for 300. Almost everybody in professional video uses doing the colorists doing the big Dolby Vision stuff, even if they're doing a grade for a 4,000 nit monitor, which nobody's got a TV that can do that, but they will still use normally the 200 or 205 nit thing. 3D LUT interpretation, if you don't know what that is, you probably don't need to worry about it. Tetrahedral is the better one. There's a new thing, though, that is coming in. Now, I should say, I will about guarantee you that the first day of Max, which is on a Tuesday, I think it is this year, it's like the 14th of October or something like that.
It's the 10th of October.
10th? Okay.
I believe the 10th is the first.
For 4 or 5 years now,
a Tuesday.
Yeah.
Is that right?
Yeah, that's what I saw.
Yeah, it starts on a Tuesday.
Yeah, which
Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday,
and the date is
October 10th through 12th.
yeah.
Here, I
So
can look
October
it up.
10th, uh, somewhere it'd be normally Pacific time, but something between 12:01 a.m. Pacific time to 9 a.m. Pacific time on October 10th. They will release the entire Creative Cloud 2024 series. They used to do the video stuff released for NAB in April, but of course, Max is the big thing, and it's across all of the Adobe Creative Cloud apps. So therefore, the cycle is released. So they don't even really try and hide the fact anymore. That's going to get, it's going to get released on the first day of Max. And so, but this thing that is new is this 2.4 broadcast. Well, there's 2.2 web and 1.96 QuickTime. Well, what is this? Okay, Rec 709, the standards were sRGB color primaries, D65 or 6500K white point, and a display gamma of 2.4. Well, when Mac came out with their Retina monitors about, 4 years ago now, for some weird reason, they created a color management app called Color Sync, and they used a 1.96 gamma in it. What, huh? Well, the standard is 2.4. Where'd they come up with 1.96? 1.96 is remember I was talking about OETF and EOTF?
Yeah.
Well, in the OETF, the optoelectrical transfer function for the camera, the Rec 709 standards specify a gamma of 1.96.
Hmm.
So they use the camera transform as the gamma, as their display gamma. Well, that has caused a huge raft of problems because if you the higher the gamma number, the darker the midtones and shadows will be. The lower the gamma number, the brighter things will be. It's kind of like, um, uh, I could come over here, go to the curves, and let's go ahead and make the, um, or not curves, but the color wheels, and make the monitor a bit bigger. Gamma is kind of like, okay, if I'm going to a higher number gamma, you're essentially doing this. You're pulling down the mids and the shadows. If you go to a lower number gamma, you're essentially doing this. So you would put out something that looked like this in Premiere Pro. And if you're on a Mac and you then go outside Premiere Pro to QuickTime, it's going to look something like this. And people go, oh, what? That isn't right. Well, it's because it was displaying it with a lighter gamma. And people have been mad and say, well, why doesn't Adobe fix it? Well, there's nothing they could fix really, because you can't make a video file that looks the same when displayed at two widely different gammas, and visually 2.4 and 1.96 are pretty far apart. So they came up with this LUT, a lookup table. It's a very simple form of math and a transform function that you would grade, in other words, color correct like normal. And then in the export process, you would apply this LUT, and it would change things so that when you, it would darken the mids and the shadows, so that when you looked at it with a screen using a 1.96 gamma, you got the same thing as it looked like in Premiere Pro. Well, of course, if you re-import that back into Premiere Pro, it's a lot darker than what your sequence was. So, and a lot of people were unhappy with that and said, well, but Resolve had solved it. They got the Rec 709A. Rec 709A uses a different NCLC tag on the file. So it kind of sort of does it. They figured out that color sync will look at a particular tagging on it, which uses a number that is listed officially as unspecified. But for some reason or other, that unspecified number, which doesn't have a value, would uh, uh, color sync in a Mac would choose to use Rec 709 for it. Well, the problem with that is most non-Mac systems, even though it's unspecified, still react to that number in a way that does basically the same thing as the Adobe gamma compensation LUT, as they called it. It makes it darker. So if you put out something with a from Resolve with Rec 709A, on most any broadcast compliant system, you all of a sudden had dark mush. So, a couple ways you could go about it. And Adobe finally threw in the towel and came out with this, which is you can set it for the viewing gamma for the program monitor here for 196 QuickTime, 2.2 web use, or 2.4 broadcast. In other words, do whatever you want. We're out of it, and I'm sure a lot of Mac users will like this because now outside of when they go to QuickTime Player, it will look like it's supposed to look like. Well, yeah, on theirs and on some other Macs. On my fully broadcast spec'd out system, it's going to be dark mush.
Hmm.
But
Oh boy.
but they will like it, and so that's
So that function really is just for the Mac users, right?
Mac users, or if you are going to be sending for Mac users.
Mm.
They've got a few other things. Auto detect log video color space. There's quite a few cameras now can record in log. And this, if you say, check this, it automatically, if it can recognize that particular log, like for a lot of Sony, a couple Panasonic, a lot of Sony, a couple Canon, and Ari, and a couple of the other cameras, it can tell that it's a log form of that of media. And if you also come down here, if you have the auto detect log checked and auto tone map both checked, then it will take log video that it has detected, and it will use a tone mapping process to turn that into normal looking video. Now, log video
I'll
looks,
just jump in here and just say that we are nearing the end of
yeah,
our time here. So
yeah. I'll give a quick thing. Log will tend to look something like, and come up here and pull out saturation. Log will tend to look something like this when you first bring it in, and you have to log encoded media, and you have to normalize it to make it look like, normal media. And a typical way of doing that has been with you applying LUTs, lookup tables, which are kind of dumb. Colorists call them the dumbest math out there. They're usable for a lot of things, but they're not particularly bright. They now have a tone mapping process, which is an algorithmic process, and it is much more detailed, and it can adapt to different circumstances because they can have many if then and ors done, and you can't have if thens in a LUT. And so this tone mapping process is really great. And a lot of people say, well, that doesn't look like the manufacturer LUTs. Well, yeah, you can have 3 different LUTs from a manufacturer to correct one camera's log. Which one's the perfect one? Whichever one works for your project. There is no perfect change of any camera from a log space to normal space. So, and so the tone mapping is just like using a LUT. It's designed to get all of your data into the working space with the least harm to your pixels possible. In other words, if there has to be some dynamic range change, it will map it without losing any gradations. And if it's a wider to smaller color space, it does the best mapping it can to get your colors in there. Normally, the algorithms do a much better job, actually, of getting the data there than a LUT. You may need to apply a little different process in your grading, because no, it won't look exactly like the LUT did to bring it in. So you apply a slightly different process in your grading, but you have a better final result. And so you have this panel here with all of these settings, and including the sequence settings for Rec 709, 2100 HLG, 2100 PQ. And if you've got a sequence selected and a clip, then you have the color space options down here. And this kind of puzzles me at times, because supposedly you should be able to highlight the click, but let's bring this up in project. Okay, now select the clip in the over here, and we come over to this, and sometimes this area, the sequence clip thing, is active and I can work with it, and other times it isn't. And I can't even tell you exactly why it's grayed out like right now, because I have the clip selected, and and it just says color spaces match. I can't tell it to do something differently. So let's go try, let's say put this at HLG, and now come over here. Okay, now it still won't let me.
Well, we really
so at any rate, yeah,
wrap this up.
this is a new thing going that you're going to have to pay attention to for working in Premiere, is the settings for your color. And it's everybody.
Yeah, it sounds like it can be a quagmire, but I think that it would be, yeah, really, really useful to a lot of people if there was if you're doing this, this is what your workflow should look like. If you're doing this, this is what your workflow, sorry, can't talk.
Yeah.
Workflow should look like.
And I am working on a color strategies article that actually several of the Adobe staffers are participating in an email chain where I'm asking some questions on it. So I hope once I get past doing all this electrical stuff and I can finish this thing, that sometime this fall, be probably I would guesstimate probably November at this point, that I'll have an article that'll probably be about 40, 50 pages or more on both explaining this sort of thing, and also talking on some things that I've noted a lot of people. I've been on, there's a Facebook Premiere Pro user group that is, they want to have to get admitted, you need to give them your IMDb credits. And if you don't know what IMDb is, you ain't qualified. And so you normally have to have so many IMDb credits and some other things like that. So these are all people that are working heavily in professional video. And, I've asked a number of them some questions about what, how they handle if they're having to do corrections, having to do color in Premiere, they don't have time to send it over to Resolve or budget to send it to Resolve. How do they handle color? And of course, a lot of them just simply said, with difficulty. Well, yeah, I can understand that, because Premiere's color correction processes aren't really set up for it as finely targeted controls as you would hope for. But there are ways to get around that, and also trying to correct shot by shot in Premiere Pro. Oh, I've done jobs like that. It's painful. And I use a big color surface, a full tangent elements panel, $3,500 panel. And even doing that, where I'm not hardly doing anything with the mouse or the keyboard for any color work, um, it's still a lot of work. Well, there's ways to do things, pushing as many corrections to as many clips as possible using the source tab. There are processes like that can greatly speed up and give you much better granular control of your work. But I'm going to be including those in there because even a lot of working pros are not working smart.
Yes. Well, because you do what you need to do. So that 40 to 50 page article is awesome. Looking forward to that. I am mostly looking forward to the Reader's Digest version.
There will be a section up front that will go over a lot of the things in uh, giving you a preface of what will come later.
Yes, I
Um,
think just having some bullet points. Would love to
yes.
see that. Okay, thank you so much. This has been awesome. I hope we didn't put too many people to sleep. That we actually, I'm sure the people that are interested in this probably loved the information that you have. So let's.
Especially that thing about their timeline thing and the way it works.
Mhm.
That's huge.
Yep. All right. See you all later.